me welcome everyone again who's joining through WebEx or calling in. Welcome to this webinar on opportunities to transform the food system, the power of partnerships. So this is Innovating Soil 3.0. I had a chance to read through the PowerPoint yesterday. It's really exciting, innovating stuff that you guys are doing. So I'm very happy to be here. My name is Shobha Shetty. I'm the practice manager for Eastern and Southern Africa in the agriculture global practice for the Africa region. And we have with us a very distinguished panel that I will get to shortly. But the whole concept of using innovations and partnerships with the private sector, I think is something that we've been doing a lot of lately. Just last month, we actually organized an innovation challenge in Southern Africa on where we were able to attract the top innovators in the space of food security and agricultural risk for the Southern Africa region. So it was really exciting to see these innovators present their ideas and applications for helping improve our food systems, food security, and so on. I think for us at the World Bank, as you know, we have been supporting a lot of the public research systems. We support the CGIAR. We work with the public research institutions all across the world. But for us, I think the challenge is how do we link all of these innovations that are coming out of the private sector and these breakthroughs? How do we, link that with really our client countries? For example, I'm thinking of Calro in Kenya and others. And how do we make this a much more systematic way of bringing in innovation into the research ecosystem, if you will? And we really need to be able to pilot some of these innovations and to be able to, incorporate them in our programs, and the benefit that we can offer through our programs is to really sort of do this at scale. So personally, I find this is a really hugely important and exciting agenda for us, and I'm very pleased to welcome to this webinar today. We will have 4 speakers, and we will have a discussant at the end of the presentations. So we will start with, so our speakers today, let me go over that briefly. Victor Friedberg, who's the FoodShot Global founder and chairman. We then have Sarah Eckhouse, who's the FoodShot's executive director. We have Dr. Gerlinde de Deen, who's the professor in soil ecology at Wageningen University. Very pleased to, we do a lot of work. We have worked a lot with Wageningen in the past, and we're currently also in the process of developing partnerships with their Smart Hubs program and the EU program on Internet of Food and Farms. So very pleased to have Wageningen here with us. We also have Dr. Keith Paustian, who's the Distinguished Professor in the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. So the running order would be Victor would start, followed by Sarah, and then Dr. Gerlinde and Keith, and then Sarah would come back again for a few slides at the end before opening it up to Q&A. Our discussant today is Parmesh Shah, who's our global lead on data-driven and digital agriculture, who will be coming in at the end of the presentation to make his remarks and to share his perspectives on what we've just heard. The chat box is open, and I would encourage all of you to submit your questions through the chat box. And the usual, I guess we've been doing this for so long now, this should be engraved in our DNA, right? I mean, please mute when you're not speaking. If you don't need to use the video, please don't, just to reduce the bandwidth requirements for those who are connecting from outside. I am very excited to listen to what our distinguished speakers have to say. So without further ado, let me hand it over to to Victor to kick us off. Victor, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shobha. It's an honor to have an opportunity to talk to you all about FoodShot Global. I'll try to keep my remarks brief, as it will be much more compelling to hear from our FoodShot Global awardees, Herlinda Dedan and Keith Paustian, and learn about their groundbreaking work that they're doing. I founded FoodShot Global out of a desire to bring a diversity of voices and capital to creating food system transformation, to create a more healthy, sustainable, and equitable food system. That is FoodShot Global's mission. When I founded the organization in 2017, I could not and I did not imagine 2020 and how being healthy, sustainable, and equitable would become daily rallying cries. It's especially this third one, equitable, that is ringing the loudest and in desperate need of our undivided attention. Access to food that is nutritionally dense, affordable, food that leverages regional and global supply chains and ecosystems effectively, resiliently, is essential. Essential not only for our individual health, but as we have seen over the last few months, interdependent health for our families, our communities, and our fellow global citizens. With COVID, clearly the data has shown that underlying conditions, many of these conditions being outcomes from decades-long systemic and chronic nutritional deficiencies, have driven the largest percentage of hospitalizations and deaths. On the positive side of this pandemic, if there is one, it has demonstrated somewhat, though the jury is still out on this, that the behaviors and beliefs, policies, and financial systems that otherwise seemed so entrenched and resistant to change can change dramatically, seemingly overnight, in order to meet a global challenge. This will be a necessary set of skills as climate change awaits us. After COVID, and perhaps propelled by COVID, the challenge of rethinking, redesigning, and reinvesting into a 21st century food system is so important. This is the mission of FoodShot Global, a mission that I'm certainly intersects meaningfully with the work at the World Bank. So what is FoodShot Global? Sarah, slide change. FoodShot Global is an organization that seeks to create new frameworks for systems change in food and agriculture, and to leverage that framework to more coherently channel investment into groundbreaking science, technology, and new business models. The organization can deploy up to $10 million a year in equity into for-profit companies that align to the framework we've developed, and can show enormous potential for impact and scale. We also have the Groundbreaker Prize, a $500,000 a year grant award for groundbreaking work in scientific research, social enterprise, or policy. The two inaugural winners from our FoodShot Global soil work have joined us here today. We are debuting this year a new blended capital mechanism, providing both non-dilutive and equity investments into a single instrument. The non-dilutive is used to propel the grantee through a science and technology risk so that venture capital can flow into the company with somewhat mediated risk. We have three mandates as an organization. Slide change. Mandate one, to start with the problems first. What problems do we need to solve, and can we flip these problems into opportunities for investors and innovators? Mandate two, to address these problems through a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approach, to collaborate. Partnering is not enough. Collaboration, true collaboration, is much harder. It requires the bending of internal mandates and milestones, a realignment of siloed strategies to find a path forward to shared values, shared risk, and most importantly, shared opportunity. This is difficult to do given the pressures on any organization to move their own priorities forward. We are honored to have built a world-class group of collaborators representing global leaders from investment, innovation, industry, philanthropy, and research. We would obviously love to add the World Bank to this prestigious list. Our third mandate is to deploy capital in a longer horizon capital continuum, from investing in groundbreaking early stage research all the way to fast moving growth transformational companies. To accomplish this, we have built this unique blended capital platform of equity, debt, and non-dilutive capital. Thank you for the opportunity again to engage with the World Bank, to share the work we're doing, and I'll toss it over to my colleague Sarah Ackhouse, the Executive Director for FoodShot Global. Thank you.
Sarah, you're on mute again.
I figured it.
Okay.
Hi, good morning and or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And wonderful to be here, as Victor said. So our first food shot was Innovating Soil 3.0. And the reason we chose soil as our starting point is that any healthy, sustainable, equitable food system has to have a foundation of healthy soil. And right now we're failing at doing that. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns that the world has already lost about 30% of its arable land due to overly intensive and polluting farming practices. They estimate that we only have about 60 years of farming left if current rates of soil degradation continue, and intensive on-field practices cause an over-reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides and unsustainable rates of soil erosion. We're losing 10 million acres of cropland each year to soil erosion. So there's really an urgent need to shift global agricultural production systems from extractive to restorative practices that establish soil as the foundation for our 21st century food system. Soil can be the medium for increased nutrient bioavailability, greater farmer profitability, and ecosystem restoration. And increasing soil's carbon storage can not only sequester emissions, but it also makes crops more resilient to climate change, improves soil health, and increases crop yields. We've seen already that there's a real threat both to nutrition and our ecosystems by ignoring soil or treating soil like dirt. And that's why we made Innovating Soil 3.0 our inaugural food shot. In September 2018, we called for a new soil operating system and published a call for a request for Groundbreaker Prize nominations and equity award applications. We received almost 250 applications and over 170 nominations from over 40 countries. And we announced our first awards last June, which included a $3 million equity investment in trace genomics to revolutionize soil management by mapping the microbiome of living soils. And then, of course, our two Groundbreaker Prize winners each received $250,000. Gerlinda de Dane was given funding to advance her extraordinary work to gain a mechanistic understanding of plant-soil interactions and their feedbacks to ecosystem functioning. And Keith Paustian was awarded the same amount to accelerate the global adaptation of his COMET tool systems, which provide farmers and land managers with sustainability metrics and decision support resources to promote regenerative and conservation-based agricultural practices at scale. We also awarded a seed prize to Dorn Cox, who's developed an open technology ecosystem for agricultural management to democratize access to environmental data and provide universal access to site-specific global agricultural knowledge. And after executing our inaugural food shot, we're in a unique position to identify critical gaps in the innovation market. We've actually recommitted ourselves to soil health and done a deep dive on how to fill these gaps and how to support best of class innovations that have the maximum potential for scale and global impact. When we launched our new food shot in April, we did two food shots actually. We did a protein food shot and Innovating Soil 3.0 deep dive, which focuses on three key gaps in soil health and management: soil carbon measurement, microbiome functionality, and rapid adoption of regenerative practices. we're making a long-term commitment to soil that we need to truly build resiliency and sustainability in our food system from the ground up. And I'm really excited now to turn things over to Gerlinda to talk about her really exciting work and how she's using technology and innovation to better understand soil functionality.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can we indeed find that? Yes, thank you. Well, it's great to participate in this webinar. And indeed, I'm based in Wageningen. And as this presentation is going to be pretty short, I also like to point out this Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas, because it's a resource that we published open online at the European Union, GRC. So you can find it there to get more information about the fascinating life in the soil and all the ecosystem services that it provides. Next slide, please. So basically, actually, this is something that was already presented in part by Sarah, because if we look at our soils across the globe, we can see that, well, they're not in a good state. And basically, in the color coding, anything that has a different color than gray indicates soils that are degraded, especially the orange and the red ones. Next, please. Can you? Yes, thank you. So basically, indeed, about a third of all our soils are in a state of degradation because of erosion and pollution. Over fertilization is also a form of pollution, of course. And there are other reasons as well as listed here. And because of that, the functions of the soils are really, they're not functioning very well anymore, actually. And on top of that, we also have climate change, of course. And well, that's gonna hamper the functioning of soils even further. And on the other hand, we know that agriculture is also contributing to climate change because of the greenhouse gas emissions that go with it. On the other hand, agriculture also provides an opportunity to combat climate change. And in that respect, soils also play a crucial role. And I think the next presenter will go into more detail in that aspect. Next slide, please. Now, just to come back to the soil functioning, basically the soil functioning as such, it comprises many different functions as listed in this slide. And how it's really been done, this functioning, it's all down to the soil organisms. So the soil organisms are really the engine, you could say, of all the functions that go with soils. And with soil organisms, I mean, yeah, the bigger ones like earthworms, but definitely also the many small ones that you don't see, like the fungi, bacteria, yeasts, and so on. So on the left-hand side, we can see a number of functions that probably you are aware of that soils provide, like nutrient recycling, soil structuring, the formation of stable organic matter, which is associated with also the retention of water and nutrients and carbon. And on the right-hand side, we see a whole list of other types of functions, for instance, natural disease suppression and biodegradation of pollutants. Now, of course, the soil organisms don't do it just like that. They also need, well, to make a living, let's say, they need organic matter to be able to do their jobs. So there's this intricate interaction between organic matter and the soil life, basically. And bear in mind that actually plants are also part of the soil biota, because the hidden part of plants is, of course, there in the soil. Next slide, please. So basically, if we think of a crop production, well, it starts with good seeds. That's great to have, but that only gives you a potential, right? So basically, what you in the end will have on your field is the actual yield. And we know that across the globe, there is quite a gap between the actual yield and the yield that could be potentially achieved based on the seed. And the reason why we have this yield gap is because of different types of constraints. On the one hand, we have these limiting factors, and on the other hand, we have these reducing factors. So the limiting factors, that's mostly related to resource availability for plant growth, like water and nutrients. And the reducing factors are mostly related to pests and diseases. So basically, if we really want to close that yield gap, and it's not only yield, as on the y-axis, you can also see that I put nutrition there very explicitly. So we don't only want biomass, but also nutritious biomass. So to close that yield gap, we need to do something with these reducing and these limiting factors. Next, please. And we found ways to do that to some extent at least. So we have ways of yield protection, and we have ways of yield enhancement. So you can think of innovations like irrigation and fertilization. And for the yield protection, you can think of biocontrol or even chemical control. But of course, we need to make sure that the way we manage our crops is done in a sustainable way so that we don't have adverse effects on the environment. So we want good production, but without costs for the ecology and for actually human and ecosystem health on the bigger scale. Next, please. So this potential, so we have a current potential, you could put it that way, but that potential keeps shifting as well because of research and development. So one way of increasing the potential is, of course, biotechnology. But there are more ways, especially if we don't only stick to one single genotype of a crop, by diversifying cropping systems as a whole. So on the fields at the same time, but also in terms of rotations, we can actually make much better use of the resources we have. So that's both natural resources, but also human imposed resources. So that's something we should definitely work with more, and that's something we work on as well. Next, please. And one of the things that I do want to flag up here as well is that traditionally we've been thinking of soil organisms, soil microbes as being bad, and we need to control them. We think of pests and diseases, but actually we're more and more aware that the majority of all these microorganisms are actually very beneficial. And so we should try and understand how they work and harness them and use them for the better. Next, please. So that's where all the microbiome work comes into play. Now, a bit of focus on the work that I'm actually doing. So I work a lot on so-called plant-soil feedbacks. And what that is this idea that plants, as they grow, but also as they die, they influence the soil and the functioning of the soil, because they interact with these organisms that can provide nutrients, but that can also suppress plant growth or can protect plant growth if we think of biocontrol agents. So as plants grow and change that soil, that has an impact on the plants that grow after the initial crop, for instance. So it affects the growth of the succeeding crop. Next, please. And this crop could grow better, so bigger, a green box. Next, please. Or it could grow worse, so that's why I have the red square and a smaller box. But of course, what we really want to do is stimulate this functioning of the soil in such a way that we get the green situation. And that is quite a tedious job to understand how that works. But recently we have been developing tools so that we can study this at scale really in the field. And that's where this remote sensing comes into play. Next, please. So a few examples here of the work we did with this remote sensing. And on the left-hand side, you can see an overview of our field site. And you see two main types of green colors, so the pale green and the dark green. The pale green, that's endive, and the dark green, that's oats. But that's not all. That's just two treatments, you could say. But the real treatments are the history of these plots. So we had different types of cover crops there. And what we could quantify also using drones is the differential responses to these different cover crops. So certain cover crop combinations, they provided a very beneficial plant soil feedback, and others provided a detrimental one. And on the right-hand side, yeah, you can see some of the products that we can derive from the remote sensing data, things like the height, but also the nitrogen content of the crop, the volume. We can do that quite at scale, but also really at pretty high precision. So in the middle, you see what we could figure out from the sky, that we could recognize individual crops even, so individual endive plants, and quantify their volume as they were standing on the field. So this remote sensing enables non-destructive, high space and time resolution type of monitoring of responses. Next, please. So in the bigger frame, what we just saw was an example of that we could monitor and quantify responses of a next crop, but ultimately what we want to do is actually already in the previous crop quantify a number of very important properties. So the above ground properties that directly relate to the below ground properties and the functioning in the context of this plant soil feedback. So what it will mean for the next crop in terms of yield, but also in terms of nitrogen use efficiency, emissions of greenhouse gases, and pathogen suppression, as well as soil organic matter buildup. Next, please. But what we really need to understand for that is how this plant-soil interaction really works. So it requires a combination of good understanding of the soil biology and soil science in the broad sense, but also of the sensing technology as such. Next, please. And so, well, here's a little summary of the challenges and opportunities that I see with the upcoming new technologies, how we can make use of that. So these plant-soil interactions are actually quite variable in space and time. Oh, yeah. But that's a good thing in part as well, because we can have situations where we keep improving the system, and that's really what we want, and we want to understand that. And this remote sensing can be very powerful there because of this non-destructive capability of quantifying how it is actually, well, what the situation is on the spot. But what you always need, of course, is this solid parameterization with ground truth data. So there, R&D is still needed. So the better our databases, the better our remote sensing technology will be. So there's still hard work on the ground needed, also depending on your location. But there are great prospects, even to move from a diagnostic type of tool to an even really predictive tool for both this nutrient side as well as the pathogen suppression type of side. Next, please. And now I come to well, the final few slides of my story, and that's how I've been using this great new prize of FoodShot Global. So the groundbreaker prize I used to really get going with new work down in Africa, specifically Zambia. And here you can see two pictures of me when I was visiting Zambia last August. And what we're doing there is quite an integrative type of project, as you can already see from the title, but I'll explain it in the next few slides. Next, please. So basically what the context is we're focusing on a crop, so on the sorghum, because it's very drought tolerant, especially compared to maize. But it's not just about the crop itself. Next, please. It is about, from the grains, you can make a very nutritious type of beverage. And that has been done already traditionally locally across Zambia and a few surrounding countries. And with that fermentation, you improve also the nutritious quality, and it can also be sold, especially by the women, because they're the ones that make it on the market along the streets. And that can lead to empowering women to have extra income and for the family, of course. Next, please. But also, next, please, to further invest in soil quality and in that way improve the quality of their crop, starting with the grains. Next, please. But now this very magic ingredient of this whole production is a very specific kind of root and the microbes associated with this root. And so far, these roots are being collected in the wild. And it's not quite clear yet how this association works between the soil microbes and the root microbes, because that's where the root microbes actually come from, and how these root microbes then make up the microbial community of this nutritious drink. And it was because of having the discussions there on site that we also found out that there are different types of species that are being used, but some species are even toxic. And so, well, we need to do quite a bit of R&D to understand which species, the relation to the microbiomes from the soil all the way to the product, and also link that back, of course, to the quality of the grains as well. Next, please. And so basically what the whole prize enabled me to do is to connect with a bigger initiative. And here you can see an overview of the club with whom I'm working. Next, please. Because it's a whole consortium that is working on traditional fermented foods across several countries in Africa. But what they did not do yet, they actually skipped the whole soil part. So they start with the raw materials. And what I want to bring in is really make this connection to the soil and the quality of that soil for the quality of these raw materials that then make up the quality of the final product. And in that actually also improve then the earnings that can be made on the market to invest back into the soil. And with that, I'm going to end my presentation here, but I look very much forward to the discussion later on. And I pass on to the next speaker. Oh, sorry, I will switch off my camera. I was just reading the chat, so we'll come back to that.
Keith, over to you now.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. You can hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. So I want to talk about the work that we're doing in my group to really try to unlock the potential of sustainable land management, both to promote carbon drawdown, but at the same time improve climate resilience and soil health of our working ecosystems. Next. Oh, yeah. So Gerlinde has already mentioned this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's clear we understand that soils are being degraded in many parts of the world, and we need to do something about that. The main point I really want to make here, though, is really the importance with respect to soil attributes. And if we want to regenerate soils, if we want to increase their fertility, their water holding capacity, their habitat for biodiversity and soil organisms that Gerlinde mentioned. Really, organic matter is really the key variable in just about all situations. So it's imperative that we encourage management systems to try to rebuild, to increase organic matter in our working soils. Next. And again, the issue of climate change really needs no introduction here. I've got a couple of figures here out of a recent National Academies report, and just the point is that we it's clearly understood that we not only need to reduce emissions as rapidly as possible and decarbonize our economy, but we're at a situation now where we also have to actively remove CO2 that's already in the atmosphere that we've put there previously. So that if you look at the upper left-hand graph, you'll see the red line is the below 2 degrees C. So if we're going to try to stay on the Paris Accord objectives, that's the trajectory that we need to follow. In order to do that, we have to both reduce emissions, but at the same time, we've got to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's the blue area at the bottom. And in order to really get our emissions down and our greenhouse gas concentrations down to a point where that trajectory is possible. And there are many different ways to do that. Here shown in the lower right-hand side, there are engineered approaches with direct air capture and enhanced, weathering of silicate minerals, etc. But soil carbon is also included as one of the opportunities, and it is, I think, unique in some ways in that it's available to be deployed now. It's relatively low cost, and there's huge carbon benefits, the ecosystem benefits for undertaking those actions, but there are also some significant barriers that I want to talk about now, and really what my research is focusing on, trying to lift some of those barriers. Next, please. So we know how to redesign or change our management practices and use more regenerative or conservation management practices, and so we've got a lot of data and understanding on here. There are, and these slides show various ways to improve annual crop rotations and reduce tillage and cover crops and improve pasture management, agroforestry, et cetera. So part of what we need to do is to deploy these in much greater degree. There are also other technologies in terms of enhanced phenotypes that encourage carbon sequestration being developed, et cetera. So there's other technologies coming in, but we have an issue of okay, how do we get more and more farmers to adopt these best practices? Next slide. And it's really a matter, I think, of finding effective ways to incentivize farmers, ranchers of all types, from smallholders to commercial farmers in industrial lands. And it's a complex issue, but in many cases, I think it boils down to the issue of risk. Change is risky. It's risky for farmers in many cases. So we need to have a way to incentivize farmers that will reduce the risk for them changing their systems, adopting these new kind of practices. And there's many different ways that can be done, and that's happening now in terms of government programs, incentive programs to adopt better practices. There's continuing growth for carbon markets, the idea that farmers can produce not only food and fiber, but they can produce ecosystem services that the rest of society would be willing to pay for. There's also companies that are producing agricultural products are increasingly interested in having more sustainable supply chains and be able to market products to consumers that have low carbon footprints, low environmental footprints, and are more sustainable. So there's a variety of policy mechanisms out there that work in different ways in different situations. So how do we then get these policies, if you will, to work effectively? Next slide. So I think really, if you think at it, it's I think pretty understandable that regardless of what policies you want to adopt, you really, if you want them to be efficient, if you want to make sure that they're accomplishing the objectives, you really need reliable metrics. So you've got to be able to quantify and verify greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon sequestration, and it's quite a difficult job in these working land systems, because we've got a lot of different emission sources. They're dispersed, they're non-point source, they're spatially, temporally variable. A lot of different processes are controlling the outcomes. Next slide. And just as so here's a cartoon that was out of the IPCC greenhouse gas inventory guidelines. And you can just see here the amount of complexity, all the different things that are going on, how our management is affecting the outcomes that affect greenhouse gas emissions and carbon storage are multivariate to say the least. Next slide. So I think this really boils down to a conclusion that you would say, well, gee, let's just measure everywhere what's happening, and that provides us our metrics. But it's more difficult than that, because really measuring these fluxes and stuff and doing it in an in-farm environment is really is not something that we can do routinely. It's more of a research task in most cases. But we definitely have to measure, but we can't do that routinely in most situations. So what I I think is becoming a consensus is really, really robust systems of quantification that involve, measurements and models together, if you will. So next slide. And this is a diagram out of this recent National Academies paper that I mentioned before. And it really, I think that the key point of this is that it's not one single thing. You need a system. You've got to integrate measurements from long-term experiments and monitoring networks and together with models and into really a scalable quantification platform that can assimilate remote sensing data, spatial data layers, can take inputs and information from the individual farmers themselves, who after all are the ones that really understand what's happening on the ground. And this kind of a system then can inform policy and lead to the kind of outcomes we're looking for. Next slide. So in the U.S., my group has been working for probably over a dozen years on developing something we call Comet Farm. And it's a web-based platform that really tries to or embodies this systems approach where you're using information that the farmer has with spatial databases on soils and remote sensing origins and different models that are embedded within the system. The idea is to really provide quite a sophisticated, state-of-the-art science-based metric system, but to do it in such a way that it's available and can be used by everything from farmers to managers and policymakers and students, et cetera. So next slide. And in the U.S., we've had a lot of support from USDA. We've developed these systems. They're being used within the U.S. government, state governments by a number of companies in the carbon finance areas, et cetera, state of California, Healthy Soils Initiative, et cetera. So we've had a lot of success, and I think we're still working on and need to improve these further. But the point is, we want to build on this technology, and then really with the FoodShot Prize. Next slide, please. What we really want to do is to try to take this technology more globally. So we've got this idea of Comet Global and this scalable quantification platform, and it's really consisting of the same philosophy of a systems approach that integrates measurements and models and utilizes cloud functions, et cetera. So that's what we're working on with the FoodShot Prize money that was awarded. We're working on, leveraging some of what we learned before, but doing things also in new and better ways than we're currently doing. So some of the I guess design criteria here is first, we're making this an open source system. We're accommodating multiple languages so that basically using Google Translate, so any user will come in and be able to select a language that they want to do. We've got a new GeoServer for spatial data layers and to be able to easily bring in the kinds of spatial data layers, anywhere in the world. Obviously, in different places, the data quality varies, but so you've got to have a system that can kind of accommodate that. The other thing is we're building in the capability to really do both dynamic models like in the Comet Farm system, but also to be able to accommodate different standards, different models in different parts of the world that might be more suited for the local environment, et cetera. So I'll just kind of go on, but we're really trying to again use the most modern technology, but also put it into a form that is easy to use and is transparent for the user. Go ahead, next slide. So we've currently got a kind of a prototype tool that's up and going. I'll just kind of walk through really quickly with a few slides to kind of illustrate that. So, and this I think, yeah, go ahead, next slide. I'll skip over if there's any tech geeks here that really want to know sort of the hardcore stuff in the back end. They can ask some questions about this. But yeah, moving on to sort of the user interface, that is going to be very much, you know, spatially driven. You come in, you look at your particular farm. It's designed again to be used at an individual farm scale. And this, of course, is going to be different here. It's looking at, you know, systems out in the Midwest in the U.S., but, you know, it's also going to be applicable for you know, smaller, more, you know, smaller landholder systems in other parts of the world. But again, just emphasizing that we've got, you know, a graphical system that can accommodate lots of different spatial layers depending on what's available. Next slide, please. In order to sort of make opportunities for people to look at and estimate what their, you know, what their historic cropping practices have been and things like this is the opportunity to use remote sensing to identify cropping sequences and what's been planted on a particular location over a number of years. This shows the crop data layer database that we use in the U.S. Next slide. There's also international ones, and so you can use that kind of information then to sort of automatically set up the system in terms of what your crop rotation, what your current crops are. Next slide. So what we're currently working on is kind of two different pathways. So we've actually got we've got the back-end computational platform with models and spatial databases, et cetera, that we're currently working on a proposal with some folks in the EU, and we've had some discussions with people at CGIAR, and there's a lot of interest in being able to deploy some of these kinds of dynamic models also in developing countries. And it was supposed to have been a meeting, I think, at the World Bank actually in March that has been postponed, and it'll probably be I think a virtual meeting later this year. But the point is, we're going to initially have a deployment of a common global system, probably working in the EU countries initially, and set up to really work via an applications program interface. And we're looking at the end of the summer to have that available. There's much more software development work that's needed on the graphical user interface global, and so we're really targeting completing that in roughly a year from now. Next slide. I think I'm just about done. So yeah, just thank you again for the opportunity. And here's a picture of my research group there. And we had a visit from the Secretary of Agriculture a couple of years ago, or about 4 years ago, I guess, that was there. So I'll end with that and look forward to some questions after Sarah makes her final comments.
Great. Thanks so much, Keith and Gerlinda, both. Really great to hear more and see what you guys are doing. I just wanted to briefly mention that we have a second FoodShot that I mentioned a little bit earlier, focused on precision protein. And you know, there's a critical need with the world facing challenges from population growth, unsustainable consumption patterns, climate change, and pandemics. There's a real need to democratize nutrition, and there's a need to innovate across protein sectors, including livestock, aquaculture and fisheries, agricultural proteins, and novel proteins like algae, fungi, bacteria, and insects. And we must work together to build a precision protein system that leverages science, technology, investment, and innovation to deliver the maximum benefits to human and planetary health while minimizing resource inputs. So as part of a long-term commitment to nutrition, the Precision Protein FoodShot looks at protein systemically and with heightened rigor in order to build a protein system that is more precisely attuned to human and planetary health better aligns global and regional supply and demand, increases accessibility, and decreases waste and environmental damage. And so this is along with our continued commitment to soil. And I wanted to just make sure that people had information about our current open funding opportunities, the equity, debt, and blended finance that Victor mentioned, where you can submit applications, or the Groundbreaker Prize, where you can nominate an individual and email a letter of recommendation. So with that, I will turn things back over, I believe, to Parmesh Shah.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I hand it over to Parmesh, I just wanted to thank. I'm getting an echo. Sarah, could you mute, please? Okay, thank you. Much better. I think those the two presentations by Gerlinda and Keith, I think, really underscored for me, and I think to all of our participants here, really sort of, I think, the fundamental nature of soil being at the nexus of agriculture, climate change, and nutrition. And it was great to see the application of Gerlinda's work in Zambia, and I was particularly interested in how you're using this for developing these fermented, non-fermented nutritious drinks through sorghum, which improves nutrition, but and also supports women's empowerment. I think nutritious sensitive and nutritious smart agriculture is very much part of our corporate agenda, and we've done several of these nutrition smart profiles in countries around the world. In Africa, we've done it for DRC and Mozambique, and we plan to scale this up to other countries. But I think it was really interesting to see how both Gerlinda and Keith, are using these prizes to really try and get these applications out to places like Zambia and other countries, and some of our other client countries in different parts of the world. So really interesting presentations, and again, congratulations on the prize. And Sarah, thanks for the heads up on FoodShot number 2 on the precision protein. Again, very much appreciate those close links with the nutritional aspects. I think both your presentations have raised a lot of questions. I think we've been getting them through the chat box. And of course, for me, the most, what really I take away is, really sort of the policy implications, and I think Keith talked about this, how do we incentivize farmers to adopt these global, these best practices? And it's a question of how governments and institutions like ours can help in reducing risk, because ultimately, this is what we're talking about when we talk of smallholder farmers. So anyway, before I open it up to further Q&A, let me hand over to our discussant for today, Parmesh Shah, who's our global lead for data-driven and digital agriculture. Parmesh, over to you for your perspectives on what we just heard.
Thank you, Shobha, and once again, congratulations to all the presenters. I think this is one of the most sort of inspiring and disruptive presentation, because it challenges the fundamentals of the ways it's really taught in all the places in the world. And I think we need a fundamental rethink of how we need the soil as a living organism, and a soil as an ecosystem, and soil biology interaction to really come in fundamentally into the thinking of how we think about soil. And because we have been quite influenced by the monoculture of soil fertilization is equal to chemical fertilizers. And we haven't looked at that it's more complex than that. And so we have a whole, commercial agriculture related with fertilizer industry and all, which is really very unique. But I can see clearly a lot of fertilizer companies also are looking at this differently now going forward. First, I would like to, acknowledge Victor. And Victor, I had invited to the first Egg Forum about 4 to 5 years back. And I will tell you, Victor, you were ahead of your time. And I think we are catching up with your vision at that point of time. And I think we 2030 kind of a new kind of a vision on which we are now trying to raise, developing our whole strategy, which is basically centered on three things. It's a healthy planet, healthy human beings, and healthy economies. And I think a lot of what you are saying today fits in with our sort of vision of the food systems. And definitely we would like to collaborate with you on that various parts of that vision there. So I think the problem is that the soil crisis is huge, but it has not been perceived as a crisis. It's not perceived as a global public good. And even the countries also have not looked at what the data is on, because they haven't understood what first was described by Garlinde in terms of the soil biology and the soil plant interactions and feedback loop. Because until we understand that it's no point in putting chemical fertilizers in the place to the soil, which is already very toxic and polluted, you will find it very difficult to have any returns. And we keep on saying we are not getting very returns, the farmers have poor productivity and all that, because we haven't really taken this problem at the roots of it. So how do we influence soil biology? I have personal experience, and I really worked on this in state of Andhra Pradesh on a what they used to be called as zero budget natural farming program, in which they were looking at how do we just change the dominant paradigm of using chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides, and how do you change that? And I think I would like to link you up with that program, because that's now a large program funded by corporate organizations and others. It's almost on 500,000 hectares, and which is using some of the principles which Garlinde mentioned. But as correct is that we haven't been able to develop the measurement part of it, metrics of which are the soils which have this problem of soil toxicity, and what things we need to do in order to really change the dynamics, as what you said, between the soil biology and that. So I think we would be very interested now in picking up certain countries and doing this balance of what the soils look like, what they could look like, and doing some amount of pilots and proof of concepts in countries, because we fund a lot of research. Like in Kenya, we have a consortium of research organizations, CALRO, where we have funded weather data, egg observatory, all those things. But I think we need the soil observatory to be set up now somewhere. So this is what I am getting out of this today's interaction. If you could show that we could measure the soil, and not by conventional chemical lab testing, but to look at these digital tools and the remote sensing tools by which we are able to do that. So in the Kenya's platform, we drone companies working with us now, helping us with a lot of things about crop productivity and all. If we could build this architecture of really understanding the soil situation of the soil, and it relates to what I think was again talked about, soil carbon as well. I think it is about really changing the way we measure, way we observe, and the way we invest. And I think it's a very fundamental shift, because soil science has been taught very traditionally. And you can see most of the soil testing labs only look at NPK, and they don't even look at the physical properties and all that. And then that's why you get that. So we are trying to work with some disruptive companies like AgroCares and all, who are building IoT sensors in the basically soil, and try to get a much more nuanced data coming from various locations there. So I would be very interested in knowing, if we have to do it in some countries, how should we approach that? We need both the things which Garlinde talked about and the soil carbon discussion. We have to approach it in terms of a public good investment, what we should do. But I think we should also make a global investment in a public good as well, because I think the ComNet and ComNet Global, which you were talking about, is an interesting platform, because you are developing it as an open source platform. We are now working with number of technology and tech startups globally, and with IFC, our private sector arm also, they are also increasing their investment in this field. So we would like to see if we can, also see how we can develop, ways of making this global soil data available to a lot of, the startups, so then they can innovate and develop products and services out of it. So, and we will circulate what you are proposing in terms of the groundbreaker and other prizes so that our startup community is more kind of known. Some of them have joined the webinar today, and they're listening, and they will be getting ideas on what to do there. The two things I would just like to end before we open up for everyone else to propose. So if you were recommending the partnership, Victor, you referred that you want World Bank to become a collaborator on that. What do you see apart from the financing role? Because we are supporting about millions of farmers all over the world. We are helping them aggregate. We are helping them access services, access inputs, access markets. So we have a whole, all our projects, if you combine them together, support almost like maybe 50 to 100 million farmers worldwide. So if we develop a collaboration and we then do it in certain countries to develop a proof of concept, how should we go about doing it? And the same question is with Garlinde and our soil carbon work. Basically, how should we then take it to the next level? What the role you see for the World Bank to do it at the global level and at the country level? So, and then the second challenge, which you talked about, the protein one. I know Shobha is very passionate about nutrition, and she led a lot of initiatives in South Asia and now in Africa also, and globally on how we can do. So I like this idea that we can develop a kind of an application which gives personalized nutrition and personalized advice and personalized, recommendations on how to use the local foods and convert them into nutrition. And we have so many community groups which we are supporting, like the one you showed in Zambia. We have thousands of such groups in Africa. If we could develop a very good product or a operating system, as we talked about, a soil operating system and nutrition operating system, which would be available to a lot of communities and a lot of SMEs and innovators who would produce different kinds of products and change the whole dynamics of how nutrition is really addressed. So how would we go about doing this? So we will really want to engage you on both the soil agenda, but also on the alternate protein agenda. We have some colleagues working on converting locust crisis, which we have in Africa, into insect proteins and in feed industry. And there's a lot of innovation thinking going on that also. But this is a new area where insects can be converted into, nutrition as well as feed as well. So there is a lot of innovation going on. And we would definitely like to develop some systematic and structured collaboration with you. And we would welcome any suggestions and you have on that. Shobha, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parmesh. I think you have, I will give Gerlind and Keith an opportunity to answer some of the questions, but also to Victor. I think I just also want to underscore the point that Parmesh made about, how is it that you see this collaboration happening both at the sort of the corporate global level, but more so on, how do we implement some of these at the country level, where a lot of us are doing our work. So maybe let me ask Linda, and I think there've been also some questions coming in through the chat to really supplement, I think, what Parmesh has also mentioned, specifically on the Comet Global platform. Keith, if you could please talk to the carbon benefits platform a little bit, and the GEF projects, but also really to address, how do we make these, how do we get these to be much more mainstreamed into national agricultural research and innovation systems?
I mean, or you add a lot of nutrients and then you don't need to worry about anything else. So yeah, I think that's a main reason. But the way to change it, and that's also part of the reason why we made this global soil biodiversity atlas, is to really, well, it was also in the context of the global year of soil. So initiatives of FAO to globally have a focus on soils does help. But then of course you also need to have certain accessible tools to show what we already know, and also don't make it too complex, make it accessible, so people are not afraid of it either, and stimulate people to explore and think a bit further than what you already mentioned, indeed, that we just use certain well, fertilizer or chemicals and we fix the problem. But indeed, we know that's not really a fix. We need to know what is really wrong in which location, and so the history of land use plays in very much. But now with these initiatives, also like the 4 per mil, for instance, the connection to global change, the connection to nutrition, luckily there is an increased attention to soils. I would say almost finally. But yeah, soils are hidden, they're below our feet. Well, also I think consumers got more and more detached because we buy food in supermarkets, we don't know anymore where it comes from. So yeah, a big way to promote it is included also much more into teaching from a young age all the way to academia, but definitely also connect a lot to practice. And there I see a role for myself as well. And like in the projects we're doing, like the one in Zambia and the other African countries, the students that are PhD students, they're all from those different countries. And they come to Wageningen and go back to their home country, do the field work there. And so we also build capacity. And I think that's what we need to create networks and spread it. And the nice thing is, yeah, you saw the group on my final slide. Quite a few of the PIs now in the local countries actually were also alumni from Wageningen. So there are already generations, at least from the food nutrition part. But there, yeah, I guess, yeah, you only have so many resources, so
how do we operationalize this collaboration, very briefly? Victor, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Parmesh, I do remember quite vividly my talk with the World Bank that, yeah, maybe 5 years ago. That was very early on in my work in food and agriculture, and glad to hear that the work that we've done for FoodShot Global and also my work on the investor front over the last 4 years is resonating still. So again, thank you for always thinking of our organizations in regards to potential collaboration with the World Bank. I think I'll obviously a much longer and more detailed conversation, but I'd sort of lay out maybe some, macro ideas that I think we're seeing as being common threads on the evolution each year that we're doing this work. And then maybe that could be a way to think about engagement with World Bank. With the Innovating Soil 3.0, what we do, and it seems that was the start of it, is to try to come up with a novel framework that we think is global in its scale and focused on the 3 pillars of our organizations, which is around, health, sustainability, resilience, and democratization and access. So when we did soil, what we learned in doing our 3.0 framework was just, and Parmesh hit on this as well, is that measurement and tools for measurement just aren't at the level that are required to not only adequately frame the issues, but then also to more efficiently and effectively guide the interventions and the innovations and the capital flows that need to, sort of come there. So we were surprised after the first year of going through that measurement tools really seemed to be a missing piece, and clearly are giving Keith the Groundbreaker Prize. Linda's work on remote sensing was an outgrowth of our learning that the tool sets themselves on the measurement side weren't there for soil. That is becoming equally true as we've looked at protein. Now we've created a new frame for how to think about protein from a global systemic, perspective. And the idea there was that protein was being decoupled from a broader set of nutritional insights, and that it had become strangely and oversimplified in terms of, protein equals health, and just solve protein, and most of these chronic and systemic issues will go. Well, clearly that's not the case. Clearly protein does not equal health, and in fact we would argue that we've passed sort of peak protein from a public consciousness perspective, from an investment perspective. So okay, now our agricultural and our food systems are clearly focused still organizationally around protein. So we're still going to have to deal with that from a multi-sector, standpoint. But what we realized early in work with the World Bank on a more dedicated approach to underlying science. And then how do we then, similar to soil, and for Linda and the soil atlas work was really a fascinating first view into could you really think about ways of bringing in data globally into a database that could better understand the role of soil in different areas of the world with different crops and the like. Same with protein. What is the nutritional data around specific populations in specific areas around the work with specific demographics that can be brought in order to make better choices in terms of where innovation is needed and where investments should be made. So underlying science, data acquisitions, and then we'd say sort of the third piece of this, okay, now that we have those assets, how do we start now moving specific projects forward with investment, with deployment and piloting, that we can actually forward our understanding of the efficacy of these interventions. So those are three broad sort of strokes areas that we think we could be collaborative with. The fourth is more, now that we've gone through the soil work, obviously you're talking with Keith and with Herlinda, about potential collaborations for their individual projects. A great example from our soil portfolio as well. We had done that $3 million investment into this company, Trace Genomics, which has put together this database of microbes, their functionality, DNA, what do they do, in the soil, and then how can those databases be used in regards to specific relationships to different crops in order to improve soil health, improve yield, and ultimately farmer profitability. We've started to find for them, like in a collaboration with Mars, a project scope that was unique to FoodShot Global, came out of our thinking that seemed to be interesting to both Mars and to Trace Genomics, around aflatoxin and the analysis of soil microbes in regards to aflatoxin presence and non-presence, and then what could you do in terms of soil inoculants or approaches to soil to reduce the potential for aflatoxin in crops as a preventative measure or as a therapeutic intervention, where there is sort of aflatoxin present. So that creation of a discrete project using a FoodShot Global portfolio company, a FoodShot Global corporate partner, was something uniquely that we could do given our, understanding of our partners' needs and the potential for some of these technologies and interventions. So I'll stop there and give Sarah an opportunity, but there are some initial ideas.
Thanks, Victor. A lot of food for thought here, pardon the pun. Sarah, over to you. And then we will probably need to wrap up, I think. Sarah, do you want to come in?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we have worked in different ways with different partners throughout the lifetime of FoodShot Global, and I think one of the things that's been exciting is that there is a lot of flexibility, and what Victor mentioned earlier about collaboration and really maximizing impact and scale is kind of our shared focus. And so whether there are ways to increase knowledge about these opportunities that we are presenting and that leveraging government resources to advance work even further, leveraging the World Bank's resources to match, investments so that we are really maximizing the adoption and the impact that we're having. That's really our focus. And so we are open to different kinds of work, opportunities. We kind of customize all of our partnerships in order to achieve that, and make sure that it's really something where there's a benefit to both parties. That's really critical, and obviously a benefit to the larger agricultural ecosystem and global global good. So that's all I'll say, because I know we're short on time now.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. No, I think these are, some really, I think this we'll need to maybe come back to you on this, on how we can really collaborate and take this further. I know from the innovation challenge that we had, last month in Southern Africa, I think there's a thinking now of maybe really trying to set up this sort of an innovation hub and really bringing together a lot of like-minded partners, if you will, from private sector, folks like yourself, academia, the World Bank, and other IFIs. I think there's a lot of scope for doing that, given the interest we've had in some of these innovation challenges that we've organized. We've organized this in several parts of Africa now. So maybe having one in Southern Africa, maybe one in Eastern Africa, and really sort of trying out, as Parmesh said, the proof of concept, through some of our country programs, I think would be really interesting to take this forward. But I realize that we are out of time. I know the recording and Q&A will be made available to those who participated and to the broader community later on. I just wanted to take this opportunity again to congratulate the two inaugural winners of FoodShot Challenge, Linda and Keith, and thank you so much for your really excellent presentations, Victor and Sarah, for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to doing this again with the winners of the Precision Protein Challenge. So I think that'd be great. It's I have a teenager at home, and he's like constantly going on and on about the protein challenges that he faces in a very different way, of course. But clearly, I mean, I think what we're doing and some of the work that our colleagues are doing on insect protein, there's a lot of innovation out there, and there's a lot of malnutrition out there. So and that coupled with the impact of the agriculture, especially the livestock sector, on climate change and emissions and so on. I think this is, I'm really pleased to see that you've taken the issue of protein as precision protein as your next challenge. So again, I want to thank Parmesh and the GSG for giving me this opportunity to share this really interesting webinar. I learned a lot today. Thank you again, Victor, Sarah, Linda, and Keith. Parmesh, any last words from you before we wrap up?
So I think, Shobha, you summed up it well. I think this time we will try to have a bilateral discussion immediately as a follow-up. So both Julian and I are very keen to work both on the global agenda, but all Shobha said about how to take it to a cluster of countries and to really do some structured pilots. I think time has come now that we need to give it a shape in terms of a partnership. And in the Food Vision 2030 proposal we have, clearly we would really, we are this time not talking about working only with donors, traditional ones, but we would like to work with innovative lot of efforts like yours, which are really working on the cusp of public and private good and innovation in a very way. I think a lot of things which you are doing should have been done by public agencies, and I think you are fulfilling that need in a very creative way. But I think we should now build on what you are doing. So I think Julian, me, and lots of other people, we will have a bilateral one-on-one discussion to give a concrete shape to what comes out of that. So we will in touch with Sarah, Victor, both of you, and then try to give it a shape. I just wanted to promise that we will not leave it with a webinar. Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Parmesh, for that. And thank you all again. Thank you to our participants who've joined this webinar. And have a good rest of the day, afternoon, evening, from wherever you're joining us. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
too. Yoo-hoo.